Hello mate, you alright?
How you doing?
And you? Alright mate?
So you got the old fire on for me, Tell, ready for another Christmas tale?
It's proper toast in here, but we're not staying in here today. We're going to go out, so I wouldn't make yourself too comfortable. No old stories today, we're keeping it current.
So Tell, Christmas has come round again, but rather than sitting in front of the fire telling a nostalgic tale, we're out in the garden. You're going to talk about something else. What's going on?
Well, it's mild, we're alright out here. It's nice going back. I love going back over the past captures, and past memorable stories and what have you, in front of the fire. But we've done a lot of filming this year, and I thought, well, we've got the material, we might just as well use it, keep the filming up to date. So that's what we're going to do. I think I said to you last time around, in the Blue Lagoon film, that, how it goes. It's all swings and roundabouts carp fishing, isn't it? Sometimes you get lucky with your very first bite, other times you have to really, really work your way through them. I can tell you this, for every one that I've been lucky with and caught with my first bite, there's another half a dozen that I've had to really, really work my way through them, and fish really, really hard, until you eventually catch the one that normally is what you went there for, like the ultimate prize. And that's pretty much what this one is.
So what did you get up to through the summer?
Mate, it's mad. It's funny, isn't it, how sometimes one thing leads to another. Well, you remember in the last film I introduced Jay, the fishery manager. In fact, he took that little clip of me playing apples, the big scaly one. Well, he'd happened to mention that he was friends with the owner of a fishery fairly local to where I live, in Surrey. I'm sure a lot of you, anyone who's local to Surrey would have heard of Twinehurst, and probably a lot of other people as well, because it's a well-known day ticket fishery. You've got sort of 7 or 8 lakes on the complex. Most of it, day ticket fishing, probably a little bit busy for my type of fishing, not really my cup of tea. But there's one lake there, an old pit 3. It's probably Twinehurst's flagship water, if you like. It's the old lake, the oldest lake on site, very mature, dug way back in the 70s. And it's famous locally for a rather large common, one called Nina. And Nina's an old one, when you get thinking about it, if I said to you, name a 40-pounder of today that was already 40-pound 15 years ago, you'd struggle. A lot of the fish we fish for today are younger than the greats of the past, the big ones we used to fish for in the past. And Nina's one of them, it first made over 40 pounds back in 2005. I believe one of the Off-Gartner brothers, remember Simon and Terry? I think it was Terry who caught it. In fact, I've got a feeling it was named after his girlfriend. Anyway, yeah, it's an old carp with plenty of history, it's made weights into the upper 40s in the past, been there a long, long time. And as well as Nina, I'd seen shots of several nice mirrors out of there as well. In particular, a really, really nice linear, it'd be right up your street, your cup of tea, proper nice one. You just look at a shot of a fish and you think, oh, that's proper, that's from another era, sloping head, dark, lovely mouth on it and that, just a lovely carp. And you're probably the same as me, I found a shot of it somewhere or other online, a young lad had caught it, and I screenshot it, like you do, that was saved to the old local specialins folder on the iPad, do you know what I mean? And that was 2017, and a small world carp fishing, but the following summer I bumped into that lad. I recognised him straight away, more because I'd been ogling at the shot of the carp, do you know what I mean? But I recognised the lad on the Tunnels Lake, when we filmed the Tunnels film. So I had a little chat with him there, but yeah, long story short, it was one of those that had really stuck in the mind, in the memory of that fish. I'd taken a shot of it, it was saved on the old iPad. So that was one that really fired me up for Twinehurst, Nina's a real prize, proper old one of the old breed. But I'm a sucker for a scaly mirror, do you know what I mean? And that one, as well as 2 or 3 other really nice ones in there, was what really fired up my interest.
So what was the lake like in Tell, and what about the stock of fish?
The lake was lovely. In fact, my timing couldn't have been better. Basically, most of it's available on a day ticket fishery. I think there's 1 or 2 lakes there which you sort of book up for the week or something, so not really day ticket, it's a booking. But pit 3 has always been, you had to have the top tier ticket. I don't know, I think they do a silver, a gold, a platinum, you know, so if you had the platinum ticket, you could fish pit 3. But that year it had been taken off the ticket. But the owner, Eddie, had still had a few people on there, friends of the bailiffs, friends of himself, like, you know, to keep things ticking over, keep a bit of bait going in, keep an eye on the lake, you know. But because of that, it was going for a bit of a quiet patch, you know, like there'd be the odd person on there, but by and large, in the week, I had the place to myself. And that meant that, you know, it's a beautiful, pretty lake anyway, but it was even nicer, you know, because all the foliage had a chance. We had a wet year as well, didn't we? A perfect growing year this year, you know. So the fronts of all the swims were lovely foliage, you know, watermint, New England asters, you know, with all the little blue flowers and stuff. Really, really picturesque, lovely. And the surface is normally calm. It's roughly a square shape, 4 banks anyway, with 2 islands and a channel through the middle of them. Really lush foliage on the islands, tall willow trees, 30 foot tall, you know, and the whole lake's surrounded by tall trees, which meant it was protected from the winds, which in turn meant that the duckweed had a good chance to grow as well. So you'd have loads of bits of duckweed, all rafts of it, all floating around the lake, like, you know. I'll be honest, that very first walk round, you know, imagine being faced with a virtually calm lake. There was an algal bloom as well, typical of the lakes in that area, you know, end of the summer. This was sort of towards the end of July. And a lot of the lakes in that area, you know, you get an algal bloom and they go through a bit of a stale period towards the end of the summer before the water starts to clear and then things improve. But from the off, looking at the coloured water, a lot of dead weed out there, I had a little flick around with a lead like you do on a braid rod, you know, and you know even when you get a drop and there's still that twang, twang, you know, especially with braid and little lead, you can feel it. Very hit and miss. All of the open water seemed very hit and miss, whereas when you're fishing close in, you can have a donk about and you can find the clean bits a bit better, can't you? And the other reason for straight away I knew it was all going to be about close in, was the fact that it was quiet, you know, like there wasn't going to be a lot of bait going in other than mine, so I could bring the fish to me, bring them in close. But also if I was fishing close in, I could always ensure good presentation. This channel between these 2 islands was pretty much the hub, do you know what I mean? They lived out there, they were out there all the time. And there was plenty of opportunities where I could have got a line through, you know, the driftweed just drifted into a manner that I could get a line through to them. But you could catch one in the morning and then you wouldn't be able to get the rod back out, you know. But fishing in the edge, keeping everything within a rod length or 2 of the bank, meant I could be consistent. I was always guaranteed good presentation. If the duckweed did spread out, come into my margins, then I could use a pole and move it out of the way, create a window by moving the pole across the surface, lower the rigging, and then the old duckweed would cover it again, you know. I mean, carp love duckweed, you know what I mean? And there was times when it'd be pushed. Although it's protected from the winds and it was rare for the surface to actually be ruffled, you still get a tow, don't you? You know, and through the daytimes, often the weed would be condensed either into the channel or into one of the 4 bays in the corners. But over night time, when it went dead still, it'd always drift, it'd always spread, you know, like, so even if it looked, you know, not so good through the day and there was no duckweed over your spot at all, like come night time, when everything went still, it'd drift in and cover everything. You'd get up in the morning and all your rig would be covered over with duckweed, which is really good. They loved it.
So when did you make a start?
Would have been right at the end of July. Like I say, I'd already had a walk round there. I'd had a walk round with Eddie and Jay turned up that day. But yeah, my first actual fishing trip was sort of 3 or 4 days later. I turned up in the evening. You know, you've got a swim in mind as well. You know, I'd had a walk round, I'd seen a few carp in one area, I thought that'll do. But once I'd pushed my barrow in there, you know, I'd had a little bit of a donk about, you know, and it's just not good enough, you know. I think I had one spot that was half decent. But, long story short, mate, I ended up going around the whole lake with my one rod, with the little braid rod with a little lead on it and donking about in every swim. And I eventually settled on a swim in the far corner. I came to know it as the Snag Corner, you know, but since then I've chatted to a few of the old members and stuff, and apparently it's known as the Boaty. That was one of the good things as well, because I didn't have a great deal of knowledge about the stock of the lake or the swim names or anything like that, so it was all pretty new. And the fact that it was coloured, even when I could see the carp and you're watching them in the weed and what have you, like right on the surface, it was hard to recognise what they was. You didn't know what, you know, so there was a little bit of mystery with it as well, which was nice. So yeah, I settled on this swim in the top corner. You had a little bay just to the right. Apparently there's an upturned boat on the bottom there, which I couldn't see because the water was too coloured. But nice looking area, and just to the left there was the remains of a snag tree. You know, it had bits sawn off it over the years, but it was poking out from the margin. A load of duckweed all drifted in, like there is most of the margins, all covered in lovely lime green duckweed. But yeah, I'd seen fish there in that snag. That's where I started off my first night. And I'd seen the water rocking, you know, in the snag, you know, they're there, but they were high in the water. And first of all, you know, when it's all done in a bit of a rush, you know, and I had a little lead about, and further down the ledge and about 8 foot, it was clean, so that's where I fished for my first night. Nothing happens, and imagine I've got 2 islands in front of me, you know, wherever you was on the lake, it's a pool, it's only 3 or 4 acres in size, but wherever you was on the lake, you couldn't see the rest of the lake, you know, and first trip, no one else there, you know, like by 10 o'clock in the morning, I've got itchy feet and I want to know what's going on elsewhere. And I moved for a few hours, but you know, the grass wasn't greener, do you know what I mean? And I was quick to move back again, come evening time. And this time round, I had a better donk about. I'd seen those fish in the snag, like I say, they were high in the water. But before moving that morning, I'd also seen one come right along the margin. Imagine a little band of duckweed coming out from the margin. And he come along on the outside of it with his crusty old back out of the water, with all duckweed over it and that, you know, bobbed up. Come right to my rod tip and then turned around and went again. So this time round, instead of going down the ledge, I felt about higher up the ledge, sort of weeding that, bonk, 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 nice bit, bonk. And it was only about that big, but it was good enough. Remember, the water's coloured, I'm blind really. Other than what I'm doing with the lead, donking about, I'm pretty much blind. But yeah, I fished that spot, and long story short, I had 3 carp from that spot. Not big uns, I think I had them up to 26 pounds, and I'll be honest with you, it was clear as well from the off that they'd recently been through spawning. You know, they were lean, the water was coloured, so they were a little bit pale, you know, the odd scale lifting and what have you. But it was a start, you know, nothing to write home about, didn't even get the stills camera out, do you know what I mean? But it was a start. So this spot, if you imagine, you've got quite a big front to the swim, quite a wide swim on there. In fact, it was the only swim that actually had tree trunks and what have you forming the swim, you know, the rest of them were totally natural. But still really carpy, really nice, but quite high up. Just to the left, you've got this tree that comes out, and I'm fishing probably 15 foot short of it, just lowering in. I'm only here to you, 5 foot from the bank, you know. And I've got the one rod locked up, you know, with the old clutch tight, and then I've got a bank stick poked in next to it. Like, you'll see how savage the takes are, you know, like the rod's bent more than what it would if you would be holding it. Do you know what I mean? Savage. But I've got to mention one. To tell you this story, I'm going to have to, because I had 2 or 3 really weird takes, like dodgy aborted takes, and I'm not talking like liners or rud, and I know the difference between a sharp hook and a blunt hook, right? So don't get it twisted. Do you know what I mean? But like, to tell the story and get it into, so you can see what it was all about, I'm going to go back a bit to a lake I fished 4 or 5 years ago called the Long Lake, and there was one in there we used to call Krusty. Wasn't a big, an upper double, maybe low 20. But he was one of those that had a real knack of getting rid of rigs. Like, you know, there was a swim on this lake that it was an aquarium swim, we used to call it. Lovely gravel slope, you know, shady, dark overhang, perfect viewing spot, you know, little snag just to the right. And I had my rig on the spot, and I'd see Krusty come out. I'm standing there watching, see him come out, and he'd drop down, start feeding around the bait, and then you'd creep out and walk back to the rod. The rod was a little bit up the bank, you know, fished at a right angle, snag style. And I'd sit down, you knew it was going to go any minute, and it'd go smack, and the tip would be right round, you were like, and it'd stop. Like savage take, do you know what I mean? And it'd stop. And that happened 3 times in an evening. Like, you know, the following evening I caught him, like, you know, and when I got him on the mat and all that, he had one of them, you must have caught the odd one where, you know, he's one of them carp, he's probably got more stories to tell than most of the anglers who's caught him. Do you know what I mean? Wide open mouth, like, do you know what I mean? It's almost like lockjaw and that, hard as leather, like, you know, and clearly he was quite good at shaking rigs, you know. He liked his bait, old Krusty, you know, so he still come out as much as the others because he ate a lot more, but I bet you he shook rigs, 3 or 4 rigs to every time that one actually caught him, you know. Reeled the clock forward and all that, here we are, we're at Twinehurst and that, we're in that snag corner and stuff, and fishing is very similar, locked up and that, and I've had the first one of those takes that I thought, well, that's odd, right, you know, nothing on the end. Then it's done it again, then it's done it again. This is all in the space of about 2 hours, like, you know, savage. In fact, I got one of them on film, and you actually see like how savage it is, like, you know. But just like Krusty in the old Long Lake, I just knew he was going to be one of them with a wide open mouth. So I wasn't playing with my rigs. The rigs I've used, they're everywhere. I know there's nothing wrong with the rigs, it's the shape of the carp's mouth, it's just a different one. But eventually I've caught him, and sure enough, like, you know, bearing in mind they were spawned out and all, you know, but he was a crusty old lizard. Look at him, old Krusty, old as the hills. Rig shakers, like, you know. So anyway, I tell you, I knew then that that one was going to haunt me, like, you know. So yeah, those first 3-4 fish, they were, you know, look a little bit tired post-spawning. Typical, like there are a lot of places end of July, you know. But my next one, which was my next trip, I stuck a bit of bait in, went back. Next one was a nice one, you know, and that sort of fired me up a little bit, you know, like, because at one point I was thinking, oh, maybe I should leave this for a month or so and then come back, you know, but no, the next one was a nice one. And I should tell you the story really, otherwise you're going to be wondering why it took me so long to get to the rods, like, but yeah, I had basically the video camera on the rod, and I'd filmed a little clip with my iPad as well. And I was watching a take back on the iPad. You know, like when you're watching this, I'm just watching a video of a motionless rod. I'm waiting for the sound. I'm waiting for the buzzer to sound, like, you know, and a buzzer sounds, and it kept going. And I thought, I don't remember the buzzer being going, last take being that long, like. And then suddenly it dawned on me, and it was my proper rod. So, right, I know that sounds mad, but it sounded identical. Like if you might even be able to hear it in the film, like when I'm playing the fish, because I've just thrown the iPad down on my bed, but a few seconds into playing the fish, you actually hear a buzzer go, and that's on the iPad behind me, the one that was meant to come up, you know. Yeah, nice battle and what have you. I knew straight away that was a better one. Got a lot of big band of weed, solid weed, just out about a rod length or so as well. And pretty much every fish I caught from that spot, they'd kite round and then weed up, and then you'd have to pull them out of the weed and what have you. I think I even hand landed that one, which is always the best bet. You know, if you've got so much weed over your rig and over the top of fish, sometimes hanging on top of the leg core and that, it's a lot easier to just put the rod down, you know, the fish is quiet and that, and then just hand land it towards you, get the net into position and pull it all into the net like that. Laying down the max, see straight away was a nicer one. And that's a good fish, 33.10. Big mouth and then really clean one, nice clean flanks and that. So that was the first proper one.
You mentioned obviously you've been baiting uptail. What were you using?
Boilies for a change. Probably everyone thinks I use casters nowadays. You couldn't have used them in there, certainly not at that time of the year. It was full of rudd, like, you know. In fact, I started off where it's all close in stuff. You know, it's not so. When I left, I'd put in a load of boilies, but I'd spread them down the ledge, you know. But while I was fishing, I was probably only in about 2.5, 3 foot of water, you know. So it'd be like 20 boilies, often broken into halves. This is the opening couple of trips before I realised the extent of the rudd problem, you know. And I'd put in a bit of 6mm pellet, and I was even scolding it, like, you know, it's like honey to a badger, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Not really the way. But yeah, I very quickly realised, you know, not through indications, but you'd reel in the bait would be a bit whittled down and they'd be splashing out in the evenings. I thought, right, stop using the pellet, boilies only. The water was coloured as well, which helps when you want to use a load of round balls. And yeah, you know, they were obviously up for a bit of bait, mate. Like, you know, they'd not long been through spawning. End of July, they wanted bait. So it's funny actually, because I'd not long had a load of bait delivered, and I'd had my usual fish meals. It was grave and complex, like. But I think I had about 20 or 30 kilos of each. But very, very quickly, I realised I'm going to fly through this bait. I think I'd done 5 kilos on my first outing, you know. So. Yeah, I've never been one, I'm not shy of mixing all my boilies together. So I came home, went through the chest freezer, I had some sauce, chocolate, I had a mix of everything, you know, bird foods and fish meals. But I mixed the whole lot together, like, you know, and that's what I used. That's what I baited up with, and that's what I used. It's never done me any harm. Pretty much how I fish on the Thames as well, you know, like a bit of a mixture of boilies, like all good baits anyway. So yeah, basically, mate, the idea was sometimes I'd be there a night, 36 hours, sometimes I'd do 2 nights, you know, a couple of times I fish 3 nights, but at the end of each trip, I'd put in a good healthy, I was drying them out by then as well, like air drying them, so you can see just how much I was using, but I was probably using 4 or 5 kilos every trip, like.
So with the baiting tail, you obviously got them feeding on the spot and cleaning it off nicely.
Yeah, I'll be honest, that spot was, out of everywhere that I led it about, all around the edge, especially the margins and that one was already clean. I wouldn't be surprised if it had been fished a fair bit through the spring, you know, so the bottom of there was scoured clean. but it got cleaner still once I was baiting, you know. And I varied a little bit, you know. Although I said I was using bottom baits earlier, I did catch 2 or 3 on pop-ups as well, but that was when they were a bit further down the ledge. It's basically the more bait I started to use, then the bigger the spread was, you know. Like if I wanted to wang in 3 or 4 kilos when I left, I wasn't putting it all on a spot the size of this table, you know. Like that was where I was going to lower the rig so that I'd get a good helping, but the rest of it would go down the ledge into deeper water. And there were 1 or 2 occasions where I'd see them sheeting up down deep, but not high up. So naturally you want to go down deep, there's bubbles coming out and that, perhaps it's not quite as clean. In that instance, I put on a long boom, soft boom with a hinge rig, like, you know, pop-up. I was swapping and changing, you know, all the time, but really it was all relatively clean. Do you know what I mean? It was, I'll tell you, there was more muck on the surface than there was on the bottom, you know, which is why I used the pole I mentioned earlier. I'm sure I could have used the pole to drop a bit of bait and drop the rig as well, but it was all so close, there was no need for it. But the pole came in mightily handily for, you know, like a window wiper action across the surface, and you just create a window. I'd have the rod ready, leaning up against the brolly with the rig all ready to go. So I'd just go down, the pole was always set up, leaning in the stinger nettles. I'd just go down, open out a window, a couple of swipes like that. And as soon as you take the pole out, you know, then it'll start to come, it closes up again pretty quick, so you have to have the rod ready to go. But yeah, just open the window, grab the rod, lower in, and then plonk a few baits around it, sort of 20, 30 baits. Again, it depended how much I put in. There was a couple of occasions I wanted to stick in a pound or so, but not all on the spot, you know, I'd spread it about a little bit.
But it sounds like everything was working nicely, Tel. Were you sort of totally focused on this corner?
Everything happened really quick, you know. Opening trip, second trip even, yeah, I was quite focused on that corner. And by then I'd also found a spot from a right-hand rod. I think I mentioned it earlier, up in the bottom of a bay to my right, where apparently there's a boat on the bottom. I couldn't see that. But with the run of the lake, pretty much, you know, no one about and quiet and stuff, you know, obviously I'm walking around all the time, you know, I'm interested in all of it. And there was one area that really caught my fancy, no carp bay. We all like a no carp bay. Quite often they're not no carp bays at all, you know, and that particular corner, there was a couple of corners that were similar, you know, where a lot of Canadian and milfoil grows, and that helped the water clarity. You know, those corners were generally clear, like, you know, you had good visibility, you could see down 4 or 5 foot. Other areas of the lake, it was pretty much chocolate coloured. The water was clearing all the while, but those weedier corners, and no carp bay was one of them, were just looked carpy, clear, you know, like just, I don't know, it felt Nina-like from the off, you know what I mean? You can imagine the big ones there. And on one of my walk rounds, I did see a couple of big fish there. Didn't recognise what ones they was at that point, but I knew they were bigger than the average what I'd been seeing. And there was a band of weed, it was only about a rod length out, if that. And on the inside of that, like I say, the water, I probably had about 3 foot of visibility, just, you know, and I could see a little, you know, you see a little glowing spot, like, you know, and a little misshapen glowing spot. But, you know, through cloudy water, and it was all weedy and choddy around it. But I did bait that once and dropped in there. I saw some fish feeding there, dropped in. It was a little bit hit and miss at that point, but I dropped in, I caught a 20 pounder, 20 pound mirror. I mean, at this point, you know, it sort of got to a point where that was more of a daytime bank. You know, you suss that pretty quick. I think that trip that I caught the 20 pound mirror, I'd done a night as well, and it was as dead as a doornail all night and into the morning, you know, and then 11 o'clock in the morning, they'd come. So very early on, by 3rd, 4th trip, I knew that was more the nighttime bank, the same bank with the snag swim, the boaty swim, whatever they call it. Not that you'd catch them so much at night, but you'd catch them evening, just into dark, and you'd catch them at first light, you know. That was the nighttime bank to be on. The other bank, we'll call it the Pit 2 bank. You had Pit 2 behind you, one of the day ticket fisheries. It's a lovely grassy bank. That was more daytime. And this little grassy slope swim, where I found that spot on the edge, caught a 20 pounder off pretty quickly. I don't know, I think they call it the secret swim actually. It's like there's a little, like an alleyway, you know, like trees on the side of the lake, and then a lovely bank of brambles, real high brambles, and it created sort of an alleyway before you got into the swim. Lovely, tucked away off the path, which was nice as well, with a day ticket fishery on that bank as well. No one knew I was there, you know. But at the end of that trip, I caught that 20 pounder, brand new spot, like I say, but a bit choddy. And at the end of that trip, I got in the waders, in the chest waders, like you do, and I cleaned it off with my feet. Stuck a load of bait in, left it a couple of days, and when we came back, Jack was with me this time, Jack and Lawrence, the cameraman, and there was someone on that bank. It was one of the rare occasions there was somebody else there, you know, but there was someone on that bank in the swim next door, so we didn't get a chance to look at it properly that morning, but we went across on the other bank in the snag swim. But by about 11 o'clock, it was raining, really heavily raining that morning. Loads of rain, dark, dingy, you know, everything damp. And about 11 o'clock, the sun came out. We went for another walk round, and the matey that was on that bank had packed up and gone. Gave us an opportunity to walk into that swim I pre-baited. We've walked in and seen fish straight away. You know, they're like up and down, clearly feeding on the spot. There's a little bit of colour there as well. You know, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a dozen carp there, like, you know, and good ones amongst them as well. Ooh. That's a big carp, mate.
Its mouth is absolutely
Yeah, I think that's Nina. Spawned out. Looked it to me. So yeah, we've walked in, we found these fish, you know, they're feeding on the spot. It's not a rod length from the bank, like, you know, but my kit's all on the other side. So I've gone round sharpish, you know, packed up, dropped in, you know, and it's a struggle to get your rod in, like, you know. In fact, that day was the first day that I 100% saw Nina. You know, in hindsight, I'd probably already seen it once or twice, but couldn't recognise it. But that day, I saw it crystal clear, and I had the cameraman next to me. Do you reckon that's a 40-pounder? Yeah, I reckon that's a 40, you know. So yeah, it sort of confirmed it. Like, you know, that's obviously Nina. In time, you know, within 2 or 3 trips after that, she became really recognisable. She was a little bit paler than the others, and you know, it's hard to explain, but if you followed the back of a carp, you know, and then the tail comes round, like, but her tail seemed to be up in the air a bit. Do you know what I mean? So like you'd come down off of the back past the dorsal line, then it'd be quite raised, and in the water, that's really what she looked like. You always saw that tail, and the dorsal line always stood out. It was really bold as well, often erect while she was swimming, you know. She had a bit of a waddle to her. So that trip was the first trip 100%, I knew that was Nina. There was a few big fish there that day. You know, it wasn't just Nina, which was half the reason it made it tricky to recognise what one was her, you know, because there was a few wide fish about. But once I got to know her, you know, I'm so close, man. I'm right against the water's edge with cover in front of me, you know, and you know, I'm watching them 10 foot away from me. Got a bit of a rud problem on here. Been reeling in with no bait, so for this trip, I just dropped a few free offerings in with my pellets, you know. Just air dries them off a little bit quicker, makes them tougher. Because ideally, I want to be getting this rod in now, and we're only, I don't know, it's early afternoon. But I want to get it in now and leave it out all night, you know. So it helps if I've got a slightly tougher hook bait on. And a bigger hair stop and all than I'd normally use. I normally use the mini ones, but I'm going for one of the big chunky ones. Because the rudd somehow having a habit of nicking your air stop, and then the boilie soon follows. I tell you, Nina was the greediest of the lot. She was back and forth, she'd go on a big wide arc, and you always knew, even when she was 10 yards away, you knew what she was doing next. She's coming, because she'd done the same thing over and over again. And she'd come in, you'd see that top of her tail as she was feeding. I've got a rig down there, you know, and like, but it was one of those fish, honestly, at that point I was thinking to myself, this isn't going to take long. Like, you know, a couple of months later, I'm still there. Do you know what I mean? I caught one that day. I had a 26-pounder. Loved the old dark common, like, you know, one of the older ones.
So it sounds like most of the bites were during the day, Tel. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, it was quite carp angler friendly, if you like. You know, I'd rather catch them in the daytime than at night. But I was getting into a bit of a routine at that point, you know. Like I say, it was only a small lake, so it didn't take a lot to up sticks and move for the night, you know. So I'd do the day in that grassy slope swim, the secret swim, whatever we want to call it, and then I'd move round to the snag, that boaty swim, for the nights. And there was a short period where, you know, I could catch 1 or 2 from that boaty swim, and then I could go round and have one in the grassy slope swim, you know. So I was maximising my time. until one morning, like I said, I'd made my mind up that it wasn't a nighttime area at all. They wouldn't normally turn up there till about 11 o'clock in the morning. But there was one morning I walked in early, a lot earlier than normal, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I saw Nina leaving the spot. Of course, I'll be honest, after that it became very tunnel vision like, you know. Up until then I was just enjoying myself catching carp. You know, if I'd carried on that way I might have totted up a bigger number than I did, you know. But once you've seen that big, and you know, it's like going back to the tunnel vision film, like, you know, once you've got a small spot like the size of this table and you've seen the big and eating boilies off of it, you'll bait exactly what you're lowering in, you know, you don't ignore that, do you? You got to keep going back to it, like, you know, and that's what it was like. Whenever I got itchy feet and did try somewhere else, I'd walk back round and I might only see 2 carp swim past, but one of them would be Nina. So I've got 2 spots going, like, you know, I've got that spot in the one corner by that snag swim, you know, the old boaty swim, and I've got that grassy slope on the other bank, the daytime bank. And if you were to go back on what I'd already caught at that point, you know, you would have thought that the snag swim, that one in that far corner, was the one. You know, I'd actually had a couple of good fish by then, as well as that 33 mirror I mentioned earlier. I caught a big common as well, 35 pounder. Old as eels it was, ancient old thing. You'd thought I'd just dug him up.
I'm pretty sure that this is one that they call the big-headed common. Think so anyway, from memory, looking at pictures of them in the past. 35 pound 4 ounces. Another old crusty. Who's catching all the crusties?
It's been in there forever and ever, one they call the big head common. But even with that, even taking that into account, you know, sometimes you just get an inkling, you know, and to me it was all about that grassy swim. I mean, to be honest, how can't it be? Like, you know, I've seen Nina actually feeding on the spot where only a day or 2 earlier I'd been in there with my chest waders, you know, it's feeding in my footprints. Do you know what I mean? So that to me was the Nina spot. I mean, if you compare it to a lot of other places I've fished in the past, you know, these fish were really visible. You know, like they'd always be high in the water. You'd see them approach the spot high in the water. It put me off of using a second rod a lot of the time. I think there was one occasion in that grassy slope where I might have dropped 2 in it, but you know, they were literally off the tip. They wouldn't interfere with each other. But when you've watched those fish and you've watched the direction that they approach the spot from, the last thing you were going to do was put another line out. You know, it's really tempting because they bubble up further out. In fact, that channel in the island that I've mentioned a couple of times, they were out there all the time. But you know, I've got one rod in the edge, I don't want another line out. So a lot of the time I just fish the one rod. But some of the most exciting fishing I've had, you know, apart from the fact they sheet up when they hit the spot and bubble up and all the rest of it, you know, but like you'd see them coming, like battleships, you know, imagine seeing 3 or 4 carp coming towards you all slow, and they'd almost come to a halt, sort of 3 rod lengths off the spot, and then one would just get a little bit more confident and come forward than the other ones, you know, and then as they got closer and closer, they'd drop down in the water and you knew they were coming to the spot, you know, but really, really exciting stuff. But even at that stage, it was difficult to recognise what was what, you know, it was all still quite new. I was seeing all sorts of odd ones, I tell you, there's some right old characters in there. There was one, a real grey one, bluey grey colour on his back and that, you know, all kinky and twisted, you know, been there forever and ever, you know, but real old mix of characters in there. By now, you know, I've sort of established there's a couple of main holding areas. You know, you've got that channel in the island that I mentioned earlier, which I never fished the whole time I was there, you know. But there was another area, one of the corners, it was at the bottom of the pit 2 bank. I think in the past it's been one of the most popular swims, big wide open bald swim, you know. We had a little bay on the right, loads of surface weed, but it was fairly deep in close there. It was quite weedy to begin with, you know, you can see down 3 or 4 foot and you can see the strands of weed growing off the bottom, tips of the weed. But with baiting, you know, the weed very quickly cleared, you know, and I'm probably 3 weeks into the campaign by now, you know, and I hadn't dropped a rig on it, and I could see that they were feeding there. Every day you would see fish up in this weed, you know, on the surface. So, yeah, the one day, it was towards the end of a trip, it was my last day of a trip, and I just thought, oh, it'd be rude not to drop in there for the last couple of hours, and I lowered in a hinge rig, a little bit unsure of what the bottom was like at that point, but it went nice, down nice. Hour or so later, it ripped off, and that was one they call the Little Lynn, that I'd seen shots of, you know, real nice one. Not the linear that I mentioned earlier, the long one that is, the big linear I believe they call that, but this one's the Little Lynn, not that much smaller, 33 pounds 7 ounces, and a real belter as well, my kind of carp, like, you know. It was a good bit of fishing, mate, you know, especially at that time of year, you know, it's like end of July, August is generally a bit of a lull on a lot of lakes, isn't it, you know, so it's nice to have a quiet bit of fishing. I think over that next couple of trips I caught another half a dozen carp. that was flitting between that boaty swim and that grassy slope. But that spot in the grassy slope, the water was getting clearer and clearer. Each trip that I went, each day, you could see that it was getting clearer. And that spot in the grassy slope that I'd got in and cleaned off with my waders, that was only 3 foot deep, you know, and you know when a spot just starts to get a little bit blatant, you know, you can tell, you can sense it, can't you? This is dying a death.
Just thought I'd show you my spot. It's looking a little bit tired now, to be honest with you. A little bit too clean, too big. The carp aren't quite as happy to feed on it. I've caught 5 of them at mine, so it's probably had a bit of an influence.
So I've got 2 swims going. You know, I've got that snag corner and I've got that grassy slope. And I'm baiting both, like, you know, although favouritism was definitely towards that grassy slope. You know, that's where the bulk of my bait is going each trip. And I can remember one evening, like I say, I'm still doing the nights over in the snag swim corner. I remember sitting there one evening, the next day I was going, and the day I go is when I tend to put my bait in, like, you know, and it was on my mind, like, you know, that spot in the edge in that grassy slope was looking more and more blatant, the spot. It was getting bigger as well through baiting, and I was still seeing the fish regular. You'd see them coming from 15 yards away, but they'd always stop short. You know, instead of coming all the way, they'd hit this bank of weed that was just in front of the swim, and they'd work their way along it, and instead of coming that last 15, 20 foot and then cutting in and coming onto the edge spot, they'd cut in a little bit earlier. And there's like a little cove to my left, a little bay, it's a little bit deeper there. Lots of strands of weed coming up, as well as the weed at the entrance to it. But whenever you'd see Nina, especially, you'd see her come, and pale glow, and you'd see that dorsal line as well, you'd recognise it as the same waddle, and then she'd come close and then disappear. And you're waiting for her to appear on the spot, but she wouldn't. She'd suddenly want to start bubbling there, and you knew it was Nina, like, you know. So it got to the point where I just thought, that edge spot is blowing, I need to sort something else. And raking was on my mind, you know, like really underrated tactic, raking is, you know, like you can clean off a spot, they love it, turned over, fresh ground. But I knew that once I'd done that, that was definitely the end of that edge spot, you know, once I've created something else only 20 foot away. So it was a bit of a gamble, you know, so I made sure, in my mind, I felt I'd milked as many bites off of that edge spot as I could. And when I packed up the next morning, I went round there with me bait, with me rake, raked off a new bit. And the following trip I dropped in there, saw fish as soon as I walked into the swim 2 days after baiting. And big uns and all. You know, like this was the puzzling thing. I'd always see the big uns in that bit, and then I'd get a bite and it'd be a 20 pounder. I think my first 2 bites off of that new, deeper rake spot were both 20 pounders. But it was something else I'd go in. At least the swim had a little bit more longevity to it, you know.
So you've still seen the bigger fish coming in over that rake spot, Tel?
Yeah, the new rake spot, yeah, they're still coming. After catching those first couple of 20 pounders, one of those was a funny old thing, it had one eye, like, do you know what I mean? But after catching them first couple, I baited it heavy like you do, left it for, I think, 24, 48 hours, can't remember now, but dropped back in, I turned back up, walked into the swim, and as I've walked in, I can see big, it was like they were waiting, you know, like they would really got on the bait by that time. And that trip, yeah, I luckily managed to catch one of the better ones. I'll be honest, I'd seen a couple of big fish come into the spot, and you're sat back, you don't want to creep too close, you know, and you know you're going to get a take, like, you know. I actually had the camera going, and as I flicked the camera on, the buzzer went. Played it out, and while I'm playing, there was big sheets of bubbles coming up, and I have to be honest, I was thinking, this is it, this is Nina, like, you know. Anyway, it surfaced, and just as good to me, it wasn't Nina, but it was that big linear that I mentioned, like, you know. So I've already caught that little linear, the 33, and then followed it up with that other one, and all 34 pound 4 ounces, I think it was. So yeah, right result, proper carp, you know, nice long one, dark colours and that, you know, slopey head on him, exactly what I was after, you know.
Look at that mouth, eh, mate? It's a proper one, isn't it?
He was a funny old carp, really. You know, sometimes you get a carp of 2 sides, do you know what I mean? But not just its flanks, you know, everything, the shape of its head and everything looked different when you turned him round.
Now that's a carp, isn't it? Proper one. Right.
And true to form and all, anyone who's been doing the filming and stuff, they'll know what I'm talking about here. When it comes to the returner, you know, it's a little bit of a toss up, isn't it? Do you have the stills camera on it or do you have the video camera on it? It could flap and get out your arms, you know. And 9 times out of 10 we've had the video. But with that one I was a bit unsure about my bank shots. I said, mate, do the stills first, like, you know. And sure enough, you know what happens. I think Jack must have taken about a dozen lovely shots. And as soon as he stepped away to get the video camera off the back, just resting on the bank, sure enough, it's got him and I was holding on to him, you know what I mean? But yeah, he was gone, mate, he was gone. So that's our excuse for using a picture at the end. It's like, you know, returners are always best, aren't they?
So it sounds like the new spot's going well, Tel.
It was, but just like I said earlier, you know, things were happening so fast. It was happening quick, you know, and I was already, I don't know, 4, 5, maybe half a dozen carp in by that point, you know, and I knew that that new rake spot, that was dying as well. You know, you could see it, you know, the fish stopped, well, they'd come close, but not enough. It was like they didn't have the same confidence. And I'll tell you one that was still coming now, old Krusty. Like, he was coming, wouldn't matter where I was in the lake, he was coming. And I'm not joking you. Like, he would follow me, you'd see it come bobbing along the moat. It was like, oh, there you are. Why don't you tell me where you were around here? Like, it'd come bobbing past every morning. Absolutely loved its bait. And I'd already had him off the shallow spot that I not mentioned earlier, like, you know, but sure enough, I caught him again. I think I took a little clip just before I knew I was going to get him. You know, I had one rod on the spot. And then he'd drop down and start feeding again, you know, mad. I've never encountered a carp like it. He was much more of a Krusty than the one I mentioned earlier in the long lake, like, you know. So anyway, I knew that that spot was dying, and Krusty pretty much signalled the death of it. He was the last carp that I caught off that spot, one before it was that big linear, like, you know. Now, what happened, there was a little period of time where they'd still, I said about the channel was where I felt that they were coming from. There was a period of time where I was convinced that they were coming from the left. You know, quite often you'd see them on the surface coming from that way, but they'd already made their way down by then, tight to the island, and they'd come from that channel. 9 times out of 10, they were coming from that channel. So they had quite a long way. Once they'd come through that channel, they had quite a long way to get down into my corner. I'm not all the way down in No Carp Bay, I'm just back from it in that grassy slope. But to my right, probably 10 yards to my right, was another swim, and it was facing dead opposite the channel. It was closer, you know. And every day they'd come through that channel, but not every day would they come all the way to the grassy slope swim. Some days, there was one day I remember, and only 10 yards to my right, they're sheeting up, bubbling and everything, in a swim that I've not done any prep in, you know. So I did move in there for the night, but it was all choddy, no good. But they were coming only from 10 yards away from me, but they wouldn't come all the way to the baited spot. And I knew then, I thought, again, I've got to change something else. I did re-rake that spot that I've already raked once on the left in the deeper water. I re-raked it a little bit further out, hoping that'd make the difference. But as a backup, I chose another spot in this channel swim to my right. Right-hand side of it, where I'd seen them churning it up on the choddy bottom, except by the time I've raked it. I'll tell you what, must have had that much of sort of leaf matter and silt covering all the bottom. So if you imagine once you've raked a bit, you throw half hour I'd spend raking, you know, and it's almost like a cone shape by the time you've raked, it's coming back to you. But you would have quite literally had a wall each side of that. You would have had a wall, like a silt leaf matter wall, you know. So when the fish come in, although the actual spot was perfectly clean, they'd still sheet up. They'd hit that silt to the sides of it, massive great sheets of bubbles. One of the most exciting places I've fished for watching feeding going on over your rigs, like, you know. But again, it was the bottom bait pop-up thing, you know. I was chopping and changing. When you've just raked a new spot for the first time, then I'd use a pop-up. You might catch one that night, and that sort of give you reason to not want to change. The following day they'd come in and sheet up all over your bubble and all that, you wouldn't get a bite. Oh, well, I didn't have a bottom bait on. It was one of them. You were always chopping and changing. Most of the time, if I did fish a pop-up, I was a bit more careful where I put it as well. I'd donk about. If it was bonk, bonk, then I'd put it to the side a little bit on the choddier ground, you know. But, so yeah, I've got this new spot, the channel swim. I've done a load of raking there. By now, that spot in the grassy slope, both spots, they're pretty much dying. I'm only 10 yards away, so I'm close enough to keep walking back and forth and looking at it. And from that point on, it was rare to see anything down there. Again, I felt that I'd got the timing right, like, you know, to create a new spot.
So what was it about that channel swim that made you think it'd be the one for the autumn?
I don't know, you know, you just get an inkling. You know, it had a better depth of water. I'd seen them sheeting up in it already. You know, we're into mid-September now, you know. And it was closer to the mother nest, you know, that channel between the islands. That was where they seemed to be coming from. And to go all the way to the grassy slope swim just seems a little bit further. If they were in that grassy slope swim, then they were definitely in the channel swim. It was one of them. Whereas they could be in the channel swim and not be in the grassy slope swim, you know, like, but So that was why. I just thought if I'm going to keep baiting and focus on one spot, I'm probably best off moving it. I mean, I loved that grassy slope swim. You know, I said earlier it was like a little alleyway, you know, through the blackberry bushes. They were good. I know. I made sure to pick a load of blackberries. You know, my stepmum and her mate made us a blackberry pie. And I took a portion of it with me and ate it in the swim. Nice.
In on there? Yeah, please. Oh, lovely. Bit of Twiner's blackberry pie. Well done.
So we're still seeing Nina?
Most days, yeah. If you imagine it's quite a quiet lake, you know, and they've all been, I've been smacking them from this one bit really, and another little corner over there. The rest of the lake they were pretty much unmolested, you know, so it didn't take long. I don't know, I've probably had 20 carp by now or something, you know, so I've had about a good chunk of them. But there was times when I felt a little bit stupid, you know, I knew that the bulk of them was through that channel. Really, I should have chosen to swim on the other side, or that's what I was thinking. But at the same time, I'd see 2, 3, maybe 4 carp come along my bank one day, and one of them would be Nina, you know, so it did become very, very tunnel vision like, but there was times when I doubted myself. You know, you're going to, aren't you? You're sat there with one rod in the edge type thing, you know, and I'm seeing them every night showing through the channel, on the other side of the lake. But like I say, it was odd though, because I'd seen Nina and generally with a couple of other better fish, and then I'd get a take and it'd be a 20-pounder, like just knocking from nowhere. I think my first 2 carp out of that new swim in the channel, I had a 23-pound mirror, nice one actually, with a bit of a cluster of scales on one side. And I had another one, I had a 27-pounder, like quite a bald, plain flanked one, like, you know. And unusually they were both morning bites as well, which was a little bit of a plus, you know, like it's because they would still be there in the afternoons. You had just as much chance for taking the afternoons. But it seemed that bringing that new swim closer to that channel between the islands improved its, you know, there was a longer bite period, if you like. You know, I had a chance for a bite in the morning as well.
So the channel swim's got off to a bit of a flyer tail, you're catching fish from it, but were you starting to get a little bit despondent that Nina hadn't turned up?
Yeah, because I was seeing it every trip. Bit of a weird one. You know, it's like by that stage as well, I had heard stories as well from other people who'd fished there in the past, you know, second-hand stories through mates and that. Nick said to me once, oh yeah, you know, so-and-so said this, she's a right old slippery one and that, you know, so it was all starting to filter back now, and I was thinking, oh, she's a crafty one, obviously, like, you know, but why, I don't know. But enough to make you keep chopping and changing. Like I said earlier, pop-ups, bottom baits, like, you know, she'd feed all over you one day, oh, I'll put a bottom bait on, like, you know, and then she'd do it again and you still wouldn't get a take, you know. She's got a massive, great mouth, you know, which is what, if I could, I would use a bottom bait, you know, because I was using an 18 miller with a sizable hook, you know, on a flipper, short hook link, lead tied on, 2.5 ounce lead most of the time, just tied on with 4-pound line, weak link. But yeah, it's just how it went for 3 or 4 trips on the trot. I think one of the next carp I caught a 30-pound, 10-ounce mirror. Nice. I think that was more of a bit later, that was more of an afternoon bite. But I left her in the landing net, like you do, always get the rod back in quick as I can. Once you've made all that disturbance playing the fish, now's the time to get the rig back in, not in an hour's time when they might be drifting back in, you know. So I got the rod back in, and I've gone to unship the net off of the pole. The pole's just poked into the bank, so I'm stood in the water with my waders. And as I've gone to ship it off, I've just caught something out right in front of me, and I've looked up, and the rod length in front of me is Nina. That was how mad it was, and it was there was lots of occasions like that, you know, crazy stuff had happened, and you almost just turn your, oh God, oh no, and then she just swim past, like, you know, it's like they're having a swim by just to check, you know, see if you're there. Yeah, I was seeing her all the time, and I was getting frustrated, you know, it just seemed odd that she wasn't slipping up. So that was a good week in that channel swim. I think I'd caught something, I'd caught on the Tuesday, the Wednesday. I remember I was due to be going on the Friday. And on the Thursday evening, it went off and I caught that big common again. What one is it? The big head. You know, the one I said I dug up. Old crusty one, 35.5 pounder. Like, you know, still a good sign, even though it was a repeat. And again, with that one, I was convinced I was playing Nina, you know, big fish and whatever. I think I got the take on film. In fact, if you remember, that whole week was a little bit lucky. That week we were due to be filming that rod film on the Wednesday, and I think Jack got a cold or a bit of snivels, and so we had to make sure it wasn't COVID, do you know what I mean? But if it wasn't for that, then I probably wouldn't have been there on that little day, you know, so like that was good timing, how it all worked out. But like I say, on the Thursday evening I caught that big head common again, and I was due to stay that night, even knowing that it's not much of a night spot, you know what I mean? I was going to be going in the morning, and I suddenly changed my mind, like the light was going and everything, and I thought, if I go now and chuck my bait in now, and then I could come back tomorrow afternoon, midday or something, and then I could get Saturday morning as well. You know, you're just trying to maximise as many bite spells as you can, you know. I don't normally fish for the weekend, but there it was fairly quiet. So I put a bit of bait in, but I knew I was coming back the next morning, so I didn't put in anywhere near as much as I would normally. I probably put in about less than a pound, you know, a few handfuls, but 18 mil boilies on the spot, you know. I got back the next morning on the Friday. There was no need to get there extra early, you know. Most of the time, when they turned up, it'd be 10 o'clock onwards, like, you know. But I got there for about 10. I had the rod lowered in for 11 o'clock. In fact, I went back on some text messages. I remember sending Jack a text, and there's one bubbling on the spot at 20 past 11 or something. So the timing was perfect, because you had to wade along the margin as well to lower the rod in. So you didn't want to be doing that while the fish were about. But that morning I got it perfect. Arrived perfect timing, lowered the rig in. Because I'd put out some bait only the evening before, and I was almost certain that nothing would have been in there through the night, I only put in about 20 baits around it, just in case something had, you know, so there was a little bit around it. Like I say, 20 minutes after lowering that rod in, they started bubbling on me, and so excited, mate. When you watch these bubblers here, like big sheets coming up, you know, they were really digging, excavating down there, you know. And by then, Nina was really recognisable to me, you know. I recognise her waddle, the colour of her, and, you know, I'd no doubt at all that she was one of those fish. There was another good common in there as well, one they call Scarlet, or the Scarlet Pimpernel. It's got a little pimple on its cheek, and that's a good one and all, sort of 39 pounder, long fish. And I definitely saw that one that morning as well, you know, so I was expectant of a bite. I've not mentioned how many times I always used to put the camera up, you know, and have the if it looked likely that I was going to get a bite, you can't have the camera rolling 24/7, can you, you know? But if it looked likely that I was going to get a bite, then I'd set up the little mini cam, and every day was the same, you know, like I'd done it so many times expecting to catch Nina, and then come evening, you know, I'd be rewinding all of the footage and deleting it, you know, like just with a motionless rod. But anyway, I've set the camera up that day, I've got a bit of the bubbling and what have you, left the camera rolling. I believe it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, I'm not using a bobbin or nothing. I've just got a slack line off the tip, like, you know, and like all the takes were the same. You get a couple of bleeps, couple of bleep warnings sort of thing, and then you jump up, run into the rod just as it starts to melt. Lovely steady take, it's taken line off of a clutch. So you never used to fish on slack, sort of semi-tight, you know. And I've gone down, picked up the rods like you do, and I'm, you know, by now I think I've caught, I think I'd had about 27, 28 carp out of the lake, you know, so it's all become a little bit second nature, you know. But I've just gone down, picked up the rod, feathered the spool, and it's taken a bit of line deep, like, and then very quickly I felt the line start to cut up as it's come around in front of me, and then it was only a foot or two below the surface. I got a little glimpse of it. It was a bow wave as it went left, and I got a glimpse of a common, you know. But even at that point, I wasn't thinking Nina for some reason, you know. But it kept going left. None of those fish had done that. Every fish that I'd caught out of that channel swim, I'd played out to the right and in front of me. But this one, totally different, and it went off to the left. Went down towards the grassy slope swim, where I'd done a lot of time earlier on. But picked up a bit of weed, like they do, felt a little bit of notching, and I took the chance then to reach back, get me landing net into position and that, like you do. Tightened down fully on him and just teased him out of the weed, you know. And you had a lot of weed just to the left. I was trying my hardest to keep everything in camera shot, do you know what I mean? I was aware I had the camera rolling behind me. But yeah, it got to the point where I just had to walk towards him a little bit, you know. So I'm playing him mainly just out of shot, just to the left. There's a bit of weed close in, he bogged down in that again. I teased him out, and a load of weed was hanging over the lead core. Got it closer, and I saw its back at that point. I thought, oh, that does look a good one, and it's a common, you know. Nina's got a little bit paler colour than the others, a little bit greyer. You know, into the net it's gone with a load of weed, and I've looked in the net, and you know, there are other good commons in there, you know, but it was crystal clear as soon as I looked in the net, do you know what I mean? It was obvious what one it was. Lovely dark back at it, the grey colours and that, you know, just, it's got that aged look to it, you know. Fair bit of weed in the net and all, you know, so like pulling weed out of the net and double checking. We've got a deep old mesh on our nets, don't we, you know, so I'm like looking down through the mesh. But yeah, I think I checked it 2 or 3 times before actually texting Jack, like it's Nina, just in case it wasn't. I didn't want to Jack to drive there and then I've got a 35 pounder or something, the big head again or something, you know. But no, sure enough, it was Nina. Just wasn't quite as wide as it'd normally be. In the past, she's made sort of upper 40s, you know, but she's an old fish that obviously had a very good spawn that year as well. But yeah, we put it on the scales, it was £40 4 ounces. So yeah, and when I think how much my bait she'd been eating as well, you know what I mean, I was expecting her to be a little bit bigger, but it was Nina, lovely old carp, lovely mouth on her, really good condition, and really it was just the perfect end to a little mini late summer campaign. You know, a lot of lakes and that, you know, they do go through a bit of a lull at that time of the year, so I just felt lucky as well, and that I had the chance to fish somewhere at that time, because like I say, I was, you know, I won't make no secret of it, you know, like I was lucky through the time that I fished here. It was through a quiet spell. Most of the time when I was on there, I had it to myself, you know, and it was just, couldn't have timed it better really. There she is. Old slippery Nina at long last.
Well done, Tel. Brilliant story, mate. She certainly made you wait though, didn't she?
Yeah, we were a funny old bunch, carp anglers, aren't we? Do you know, like we always moan our heads off when we can't find nowhere nice to fish. And then once we're there, all we want to do is get the job done as quickly as possible. Do you know what I mean? And then run out of places to fish again, you know. Proper chuffed. You know, I really put my foot on the gas a bit towards the end, you know what I mean? I was there as often as I could, and but a lot of it's because I'd have a place I wanted to be, you know, come the autumn months, and you know, you always feel like time's running out. I knew where I wanted to be in October. I caught Nina October the 1st, luckily enough, you know, which did free me up to go elsewhere, like, you know, and oh mate, it's been a great year really. You know, like when you catch one off the back of another one, you know, you get on a little bit of a roll, don't you? You know, and I got lucky with another real nice scaly one from a water I'd had my eye on for a little bit. I'd actually had a couple of trips in the spring, but yeah, got back there for October. And then I went to another one in the Cotswolds and got lucky and caught one of the big ones there. You know, it's just how it goes sometimes, you know. I think confidence breeds confidence, doesn't it? You know, you catch one and then if you use your head and don't sort of rest on your laurels, you know, like while you're in that frame of mind, you're in the zone, you're proper into it and that, you know, focused, you're sorting your kit out, you know what you're doing. I think it's always beneficial to just keep going as much as you can, you know. Now we're into the start of December and that, we've had the first cold snap, Christmas is on its way. You know, this time of the year, this little period, it's the time to take stock, isn't it, you know, and make plans for next year and what have you. And I've got no doubt I'll be doing a fair bit through the winter as well. You know, I'm still madly obsessed with it. I can't stop, like, you know. So, no, I'll see what happens, mate. But I'll still be carp fishing right through the winter, no doubt.